In 1978, immediately after I had graduated from university, I was working in the research department of a commodity company located in an office somewhere beyond Tower Bridge in St. Catherine's Docks. The company specialized in buying and selling metals for its clients on the futures market. Quite an unlikely career for a future rabbi, but at that point it was more important to secure a job than to think about any long-term plans. The research department was a sophisticated name for a tiny office that was essentially two people, the research boss and myself. And seeing that my boss loved his motorbike more than his job, I rarely saw him. Soon I became a relative expert, relative being the operating word there, on the tin market in South America, and would diligently write up my reports on the volatility of the price of tin and what political or economic events were influencing the futures market. One day we were introduced to a new addition in the office. It was a computer. It was a keyboard that stood in the office on a very slim and unsteady metal frame, about the size of an electronic piano. I was taught how to enter the current prices of the metals into the computer, and old-style computer paper would spew forth indicating the predictive prices of each one of the metals over the next 3, 6, and 9 months. It was an intense environment for the traders, and I was glad that I was cocooned on my own with all the relevant journals and newspapers that form the basis of my so-called research. I thought about this fairly short episode in the history of my career when, at yesterday's Pesach service, my computer decided to break all connection and cut me off completely just at the point when I was about to introduce the Torah service. I gather there was an uncomfortable minute which seemed like an eternity to me while people waited for me to speak. It was a bit unnerving, but perhaps not as unnerving as the first night that Igor and I were sharing the Friday evening service online 2 weeks ago, when the doorbell had gone off in the middle of Igor's sermon. Luckily, my microphone and video were turned off, just as well as there had been burglars who had made an attempt to break into a neighbor's house and escaped by jumping across the fences between the gardens and had broken fences on both sides of my garden, making quite a noise outside the window of my study as they attempted to escape, right in the middle of the service. At the door were the police trying to track down what had happened, as the driver of the getaway car had tried to run over one of the police officers. How do you explain to the policewoman that you can't open the door because you're expected to be on the virtual bimah in 2 minutes to make kiddush? None of this, of course, has anything whatsoever to do with Shabbat or Pesach, which we're in the middle of celebrating, except to tell you that more stressful than anything, more stressful even than intruders in my garden, has been getting to grips with the technology involved in conducting services, meetings, prayers, and other events in a virtual environment. I am deeply grateful to all those who are half my age and seem so comfortable with the operational side of things. And the other thing is this technology is forcing us to find new ways to celebrate Shabbat or to make a Seder with family and friends. It is testing us to retain the strong connections in our communities and helping us to facilitate families to immerse themselves in Jewish rituals and creativity. Rabbi Igor mentioned at the service yesterday, to celebrate the first day of Pesach, that in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple, the rabbis had to clothe the bare bones of their observances, Shabbat and festivals and life cycle events with new rituals based not in the temple, but in the home and synagogue. Of course, this didn't happen overnight. There was no sudden revolution. Synagogues had probably been in existence in the diaspora long before the destruction of the temple. The hard evidence shows that they existed in places such as Ptolemaic Egypt in the 3rd century BCE and in other parts of the Hellenistic Empire, and probably long before that by centuries. Nevertheless, it was in this period from the late 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era that new breath was breathed into the ancient and now dead cultic world of the Jewish people. It makes our Haftarah for this Shabbat in Pesach from Ezekiel particularly significant and relevant for all of us. The prophet's vision of a valley full of dry bones is transformed as God breathes his breath into them, puts sinews on them, and covers them with flesh and skin so that they will live. While Ezekiel's vision relates to the slain corpses during the siege of Jerusalem and the destruction of the holy city, and is addressed to the exiles suffering in captivity in Babylonian exile, promising them a return to Judah and the revival of the people. This is also a vision that speaks to us in our own time. I prophesied as God had commanded me, said Ezekiel, and the breath came into them, and they came to life. The word ruach, which is translated as breath, can also mean wind, taking us back to the opening verses of creation. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al penei tahom, a wind from God hovered over the face of the deep. And ruach can also mean spirit, energy, disposition, temperament, understanding, wisdom and skill, and the Ruach Elohim, the spirit of the divine presence. In this time, we are gathering all our energies, our wisdom, our skills. We are practicing being patient and calm and breathing deeply. We are molding our temperaments to unprecedented conditions as we face the next future months and weeks that still remain uncertain. In every generation, says the Haggadah, each individual must see themselves as if they were the ones who actually went out of Egypt. And in every generation, we have to discover our own understanding of the faith into which we have been born or which we have adopted, its institutions and symbols, its rituals, its history, its texts, its music, and its teachings. We have to breathe new life into our Judaism, preserving our communities in different ways, creating new interpretative ways to observe our festivals and Shabbat, and holding on to the vision and the knowledge that the hand of God's Spirit remains upon us to do the divine will for the good of all humanity. Kein yehi ratzon. May this be God's will, and let us say, Amen.